I'm Danielle, and welcome to this enchanted house, which is in the most haunted city in Michigan. So, I live in this town called Monroe, Michigan. It is, because I'm a Michigander, it's down here. It's the last kind of big city you will get before you get to Ohio. So, it's roughly kind of halfway between Detroit and Toledo. We're a little closer to Toledo than we are to Detroit. But yeah, I live there. It's not huge. So I was browsing the Facebooks as you do, and I came across this little infographic posted by a group called Abandoned and Haunted World, which lists the most haunted cities in every state. And sure enough, not far down on the list was Monroe, Michigan. And it's like, to me, that makes perfect sense that Monroe would be the most haunted city in Michigan. It might not to someone who's not from Monroe, but given how weird and unusual the city can be sometimes, did not surprise me in the least. And I wanted to make a video about it. And I thought about, I could go ghost hunting, but it's now February. I started doing this, actually filming stuff for this in January. And it was cold, and it's still cold. I don't want to be outside cold late at night, or I'd have to get permission to stay at some of the more haunted places in Monroe. But I thought I'd talk about maybe why Monroe is the most haunted city in Michigan and what makes it so where you might think it might be something like Detroit or Sault Ste. Marie or even Hell, because it's got that Hell, Michigan's very, very notable for just being named Hell. But Monroe's got some unique qualities to it that kind of maybe makes it really that lean towards it being the most haunted. It has a really interesting history, and so I'm going to talk about that today. And let's talk about why Monroe is the most haunted city in Michigan. One of the things I think qualifies for a city being haunted is it needs to be old. Not necessarily this is a requirement, but I think it's one of those factors that can really help. Now, we're talking America, so in terms of modern cities, nothing here is old compared to something like, say, Europe or Asia or basically anywhere else in that sense per se. But that also overlooks the fact that the continent was occupied by Native American populations long before Europeans showed up. But Monroe itself has been occupied for a really long time. The first kind of recorded people living here were the Potawatomi. This was their summer grounds where they hunted and fished over the warmer months. We are situated on what's now called the River Raisin, which is a really lovely shallow river that's got at the time had lots of fish. There's lots of game. The wild rice grew in the bay marshes in the bay areas, because this is all wetlands around here as well, and they were here. We don't know exactly how long they had occupied it, but the best archaeological evidence puts it around from somewhere between them starting here about 1550 to 1650. I know it's like a 100-year gap. Archaeological evidence puts them at least 100 years before Europeans even show up. So, and we don't know, there might have been other groups before that. I know there's signs of much older human occupation throughout the state. Let's talk about the European settlers and so on and so forth. So around 1679, Robert de La Salle explored this general area and claimed it for New France. And this was part of the French settlers and the Acadian French who came in and were mostly involved in things like fur trade with the Native Americans, because there was plenty of beaver, and beaver pelts were really popular for making men's top hats at the time. So there was a huge trade in furs and beaver pelts. So in 1784, Francis Navarre comes down from Detroit, and he's a young man, and he negotiates with the Potawatomi who are currently living in the area for some property that they aren't using downriver to form a settlement. And the settlement will become known as Frenchtown, and eventually will become known as Monroe. And this makes Monroe possibly the third oldest settlement. It's debatable, but we're going to go with third oldest for now. Right after Detroit and Sault Ste. Marie, I believe. Francois comes down and he's joined by friends and family members, and soon we have a very bustling community here. Another settlement actually forms slightly north of Frenchtown at Sandy Creek. So we have this small bustling community of about 100 so families that form around the River Raisin called Frenchtown, which will be later today called Monroe. There's one other settlement that forms nearby, kind of north at Sandy Creek, which is still part of Monroe County. Sometimes when I talk about Monroe, I'm talking about the city proper. Sometimes I'm talking about the whole county. It gets a little confusing sometimes, but usually when we say Monroe, we think of the city of Monroe and kind of the surrounding townships and areas. So one thing that this results in is there's just a lot of people have lived here over time, a lot of people have died here over time, and a lot of people are buried here over time. Monroe has several cemeteries. The thing is, for a long time, it was not unusual to have a family plot or family cemetery on your property. So you find a lot of these, not just in Monroe, but all around the Midwest and in Michigan, where you drive along, and then there's just this tiny little cemetery, kind of in the middle of nowhere, or next to a farmhouse. This sometimes results in lost cemeteries. One of them was a potter's field that was found when they went to build the community college. And another one is the first known cemetery in Monroe, which was just found at the end of my street. So this is St. Antoine Cemetery. It's Monroe's kind of lost cemetery. It was the first cemetery in the settlement that was Frenchtown, which is now Monroe. As you can see, there's a subdivision around here. And what happened was, in the 90s, they were building this subdivision, and they discovered that this was a cemetery. It had been lost. There were records in the county museum of it, but no one knew where exactly it was, and they found it. Anyways, there was almost a poltergeist situation here where they built a brand new subdivision on an old cemetery, but they did find it, and they had archaeologists look at it, and the decision was made to preserve it as a park, and the remains are still here, so this still is a cemetery. Rather than separate monuments, because they're not, it would be hard to identify the remains, they have a monument here that lists all the last names of the people who were buried here. So, yeah. Fun fact, I am descended from some of the original settlers here in Frenchtown, Monroe. On my mom's side, we're very French, Muscat French. So, yeah, some of the names on here are for my ancestors. So, Levine is one of my ancestors. A lot of these names are still, there's lots of people with these names. There's lots of Riams, I know, Nettos. So that is Monroe's lost cemetery. And so Monroe is super old. There's lots of cemeteries. There's lots of people who've died here over the years. But that alone maybe isn't enough to make it the most haunted. Because like I said, there are places that are older or almost just as old. So what sets Monroe apart? When you think about ghost stories and ghost hauntings, there's usually something tragic or violent. Not always, but usually. And Monroe has its fair share of that. So let's talk about some of Monroe's more violent, more tragic history, and see if that's what qualifies it to be the most haunted city in Michigan. Could it be Prohibition? So, for those who don't know what Prohibition is, during the 1920s, the sale and distribution of alcohol and liquor was prohibited in the United States as sort of a moral crusade to try to improve society. Didn't really work, and in fact created a whole new sort of crime where you have people trying to sneak in alcohol, make their own alcohol, and Michigan, and in particular Monroe, was right at the center of that. One thing to keep in mind is that Prohibition actually started almost 2 years earlier in Michigan than it did in the rest of the country. It was through a state law. And good old Monroe, right on the border with Ohio, was poised to be a key place to start sneaking in alcohol across state lines. And so when Prohibition hit nationally, a lot of those networks were already set up in the state, and the state was still in a really great position to sneak in alcohol from Canada, even though the Great Lakes are there. So we had people who would either go across by boat to Canada, or in the winter, like it is now, drive across on the ice and sneak in alcohol. There was also trade. There was also a good business of making alcohol. Like I said, this place is called the river. Monroe, the river is called the River Raisin because when the first missionaries came down here, they called it that because of all the grapes that grew along the river. And this is a great place to grow sort of more of the Concord grapes. But there is always been, as long as I can remember, sort of a hobby of making wine in Monroe, making homemade wine. Monroe in particular, with its access to Lake Ohio, Lake Erie, and northern parts of the state, was a prime place for bootlegging, rum running, and all these now illegal activities, as well as speakeasies, which were secret bars. Monroe had, as far as we know, a couple at least. And these were all run by organized crime. This is where organized crime really takes off in America. This is the era of like Al Capone and such. And Monroe had a very violent period in this time when you have all these bootleggers and rum runners trying to get alcohol through, and they're trying to sneak it through, but they're also trying to just fill up their trucks, drive it through, and this results in a lot of like high-speed car chases with police, shootouts between police or shootouts between rival gangs, and so lots of violence and lots of death, and this is something that's, associated with ghosts. In fact, a lot of places that are associated with this organized crime, bootlegging, rum running across the country are supposed to be haunted. So Monroe has its definite fair share of that. In particular, a road that runs through Monroe called Dixie Highway was nicknamed Avenue de Booze because there were so many rum runners going up and down this road, going from Detroit, where the Purple Gang kind of reigned supreme and was bringing in alcohol, down to Ohio to help distribute it. So we have a lot of death from gang violence, from high-speed car chases and wrecks. But once again, we're kind of in the position, well, it wasn't just Monroe. Like I said, Detroit, Purple Gang, especially like this area in particular, because the Detroit River is so thin, it's actually a very easy crossing point into Canada by boat or like right now. I would not recommend driving across it at any time, but in theory you can drive across if it's frozen enough. So yeah, a lot of violence, but like I said, it's not just Monroe. We need something else, something really tragic, really violent, because that's really what you get hauntings from, is tragedy and violence. Like, it has to have this sort of weird psychic imprint that makes people think of that really evokes being taken before your time or unfinished business. And there's one event in Monroe that's unique to Monroe that probably makes it the most haunted city in Michigan. So let's talk about the event that probably makes Monroe the most haunted city in Michigan: the battles of the River Raisin. The War of 1812 is kind of considered one of America's forgotten wars. It's the one that kind of, if it comes up, we're usually talking about the British coming in and burning down the White House. That's sort of the big kind of shocking thing that happens. However, most of the war was actually fought along the Great Lakes region, and so that the St. Lawrence Seaway there, were from, or as naval battles. So we're going to talk about one specific battle that takes place here in Monroe. at the end of January in 1813 over several days. And this is called the Battles of the River Raisin. It's a series of battles, that all took place here. And it was probably the biggest loss of life during the War of 1812. Britain's doing a lot of crazy stuff, and one of them is they have taken over parts of Canada, and they are coming down, and they come in and they take they captured Detroit, which was a fort at the time, and they're garrisoned up there, and they send a force, since they're trying to move down, they send a force down to come occupy what is then Frenchtown. So the Americans are building up their forces to come up and try to take back Detroit. And the person put in charge of this is Major General William Henry Harrison, who would later go on to be one of the presidents. It's a whole other thing where he wasn't president for very long. Anyways, though, he's in charge, and he sends General James Winchester up with a group of American soldiers and volunteers from Kentucky to get ready, and they're supposed to meet up, and then they're all going to go up together. Winchester decides to kind of ignore orders after hearing about the occupation of Frenchtown, and there's not a huge force there, and so he decides he's going to try to take it. Sends Lieutenant Colonel William Lewis and a force of 666 soldiers, that seems like a very ominous number, to go retake Frenchtown. And there's a small force here of Canadian militia and Native Americans who have sided with the British in this conflict. So they will be fighting on the side of the British throughout this. There are Potawatomi, but there are other tribes, and they're famously led by Tecumseh. But he will not be present at this battle. There's a brief skirmish, and they retake Frenchtown very quickly. During their retreat, if you remember when I was talking about the history, I mentioned the Sandy Creek settlement. The Potawatomi raid it and just basically decimate to the ground, and it's never rebuilt. That happens on January 18th. And then on January 20th, Winchester brings the rest of his forces up to meet up here with Lewis, and they... So there's approximately now 1,000 troops stationed here in Frenchtown. Harrison's not exactly happy Winchester didn't listen to him, but he is glad that they did manage to take Frenchtown, and he does send more reinforcements on top of that as well. Meanwhile, up in Detroit, British Brigadier General Henry Proctor hears that Frenchtown's been taken, and he starts to amass a force of British soldiers and their Native American allies to take Frenchtown back. On January 22nd, the British sneak up on Frenchtown. The Americans were not prepared, and they were caught off guard, and they only managed to hold their ground at Frenchtown for about 20 minutes before they're completely overrun, and they take off, and the British and Native American forces just basically chase them down. So Proctor gives Winchester the option of surrender. Otherwise, he will burn the entire settlement to the ground. Winchester, rather than have all these people who, I'll say, there's still settlers there. There's people who fled, but rather than have this burnt to the ground, he chooses surrender. Some of his men are not happy with him. They would have fought to the last man, but this is the choice that Winchester makes. At the end of the battle, 397 Americans are dead, and 547 were taken prisoner. So a huge chunk of the force is either dead or taken prisoner. And like I said, this battle in particular is the largest loss of life in any battle during the War of 1812. But it doesn't end there. Proctor, not wanting to make Winchester's mistake, knowing that Harrison is coming up with more forces to eventually come and try to take Detroit, decides to go back and fortify Detroit. He takes with him any prisoners of war who can walk. They're going to be taken to Fort Malden, which is actually in Canada. They will be not have to march just north, but march across the frozen lake as well. He leaves all the injured, wounded, sick, basically anyone who couldn't move easily at Frenchtown with the Native Americans, with the understanding that they're going to bring them up later. Maybe he would send sleds for them or something. But that's not what happens. On January 23rd, the Native American forces really don't want to be there either, because they understand that this is not a great position to defend. And they decide to leave, but they are not going to leave the American prisoners alone. Anyone who can walk at all is is forced to leave. Anyone who cannot walk or is incapacitated is killed. In particular, the cabins where these prisoners were being held are set on fire, and any who try to leave them are shot. And this is known as the River Raisin Massacre. Then as they continue north, any prisoner who falters is shot and left for dead. As one of the survivors of this put it, the road was for miles strewed with the mangled bodies. So the estimates of how many people were killed in the massacre vary. It's somewhere between 50 and 100 more people, but this is a really horrific way to die. The massacre is actually very shocking to Americans. They hear about it afterwards, and Remember the Raisin becomes a battle cry as American forces finally retake Detroit and move into Canada. So this little area out here, this little grouping of trees and this empty field is the battlefield of the River Raisin. This is where the Frenchtown settlement was, and this is where the battle took place. So this is supposedly a very haunted area, and people have reported seeing figures out here. I don't know how much stock to put in orb photography, but there's been lots of orb photography out here. But lots of different phenomenon. So I apologize for the audio on this, and I may have dubbed over it, so we'll see, but I don't know what that noise is, but over there you can see the River Raisin again, and there's an island over there. That's where the American forces launched their initial attack, and also where they fled during the second attack and were gunned down. So over there is actually also supposed to be very, very haunted. I just want to say I'm by this flagpole that currently has no flags on it, but there's a thing here that's banging. So if you hear banging, that's what it is. So this house served as the original Battlefield Visitor Center. It's older than that, not as old as the battlefield itself, but the Visitor Center recently moved just down the street to a nicer, larger building, and this one, there's not currently anything here right now, and I'm not sure what the plan is for this building, but the building is supposedly like really haunted. People who've seen figures up in those windows up there long after the building, because the building was not occupied at night, they'd see figures up there, but there could be staff or stuff. People who've worked here late at night have reported lights turning off and on by themselves, hearing footsteps, doors opening and closing by themselves, the alarm system going off. So, it is like right square where the battlefield is, so it might be haunted. So I bet you're wondering, have I ever had my own ghost experience while living in Monroe? And the truth is, I've had a lot, but there's one that I've had a couple times in the same area that's a little weird. So a couple times, and the most recently was probably about a year ago. I was driving home late at night from my parents' house, and as I approached this intersection right about here, kind of next to this pole, I see a figure. It looks like a man standing there, but as I get closer, he disappears. And coming from both directions, coming from this way, going this way, and going this way, over the years, I have seen someone standing kind of next to where this telephone pole is, like 3 or 4 times late at night. There's lots of explanations. It could be a trick of the light. It could be, my tired mind just filling it in again and again because I saw it the first time, and then my mind just like, oh, that's where something's there. But we are But we are right by the battlefield. We are within battlefield range. Also, this is Dixie Highway, so Avenue to Booze. I don't know if there are any particular car accidents along this way. And finally, to point out that I have only scratched the surface of what makes Monroe haunted. Before this got turned into a national battlefield, over here and across the street were Monroe's paper mills. These were large industrial buildings, and there are recorded industrial accidents happening there, so I could have seen a ghost of a worker too. Or just some other random ghost. Anyways, he likes to stand right about here. I can't tell if he's standing like where the snow is or if he's standing on the sidewalk. I usually just see him out of the corner of my eye for a minute and then he's gone. So, but yeah, that's my ghost sighting. So that's my ghost experience, at least by the battlefield, Avenue to Booze, that's at least my ghost experience. The only one I really have by the battlefield. But making this video, every person I told about that I was doing this either had their own ghost story or knew of a ghost story. And like they're like, oh, you should check out this place, or you should check out this place, or you should check out this place. And it's like, oh my gosh, there are so many places that have ghosts attached to them in Monroe. So, yeah, Monroe's pretty haunted. And I really only scratched the surface in this video. I only really talked about kind of the history and why, some of the big reasons that might be. But yeah, if you are coming down 75 between Detroit and Toledo, and you want to stop off and see some ghosty stuff, or just go and experience some great history, because Monroe is a very historic area, yeah, stop by. So, I'd love to hear from you guys about your ghost experiences. Did your town make the list? Why do you think that is? Let me know. If you're from Monroe, I'd love to hear your ghost stories. I always kind of surprised at how spooky this kind of unassuming little town that can be sometimes. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you do, please give it a like. Please check out my other videos. I don't do a whole lot with ghosts yet, or I don't know. I have one other video if you want to check it out about how not to talk to the dead. So if you do come to Monroe and want to ghost hunt, it's my own personal tips. But otherwise, please check out my other videos. If you like what you see here, please subscribe, and you can catch up with the latest and the greatest. I do have social media down below. If you want to connect with me on Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter, there are links down below. I hope you guys have an enchanted day, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye!